Shir is dedicated to Nishmas Rachalea Bas Rav Chaim Tzvi. We've been discussing the Lach of Kotev. I want to go over one point that we mentioned last week and just suggest a different idea and then move on. And Bez Hashem will be moving towards Halach L'Maisa as well. So we discussed a very striking machlokes between the Rashba and the Ran regarding how you intersect and how you relate Kotev and Kol HaTorah Kula with Kotev on Shabbos. We saw the Gemara Maseches Gittin, which indicates that when it comes to a get, you need a real bona fide ksiva. After all, the Torah tells us v'kosav lo v'nosan sefer krisos. This idea of v'nosan, you certainly have to give it. Also v'kosav, you have to write a proper get. And the Gemara there in Maseches Gittin, Daf Yutes, Daf Chav, deals with what's called Kotev when it comes to writing a get. And the Gemara had two braisos that contradict each other. One brisa indicates that when you do chakika, when you engrave a get, that is called kosev. The other brisa says it's not considered to be kosev. You have a contradiction. And the Gemara resolves that contradiction by telling us there are two different ways you can engrave. Ha-chok tochos and ha-chok yirechos. You can go ahead and engrave when you etch the letter itself. That's what's called chok yirechos. You're working on the yerech, the leg of the letter itself. That is called kosev. When you're operating the letter, that's considered to be kosev. However, when you engage in chok tochos, that is to say, you're not operating on the letter, you're rather operating on the background to the letter. Let's say you're depressing the back so that the letter protrudes forward. You're not operating on the yerech of the letter, but rather on the toch of the letter. That is not considered to be kosev when it comes to a get. Then we saw that seems to at first blush contradict our Gemara Maseches Shabbos on Daf Kuf Daled, because the Gemara there tells us that if you go ahead and have a ches and you erase the gago shel ches v'aso shnei zaynin, or you have a dalet and you eliminate the spitz of the dalet to create a reish, that is called kosev. But is that not the same as operating on the background of the letter? You're not operating the letter itself. You're operating the background on the extra piece of the dalet. That's not the letter. That's the reish. That's the background of the reish. When you're operating on the gag of the ches, that's not the two zayins. That's the excess of the zayin. That's the background. Yet here, when it comes to Shabbos, we call this really ksiva. This is called bona fide ksiva. When it comes to gittin, so we said that's called chok tochos, and chok tochos is not called kosev. So we saw two approaches in the Rishon. We saw the approach of the Rashba, and we saw the approach of the Ran. The Rashba seeks and sought to go ahead and integrate both sugyas. There's the same exact definition you have when it comes to Shabbos as you have when it comes to Kol HaTorah Kula. And therefore you must come to the conclusion that when you remove the gag of the gag of the ches, or the spitz of the dalid, that indeed is not called chok tochos. It looks like chok tochos because you're operating on the background of the letter, but no. Since there is a spitz of the dalid and it is part of the dalid, that's not considered to be real chok tochos. That's called working on the letter, not on the excess of the letter. So too when it comes to the gag of the ches. In other words, what the Rashba does, he says the same exact definitional parameters exist when it comes to kosev and gittin as they exist when it comes to kosev and Shabbos. The only issue is that you have to determine what is actually called chok tochos, and removing the spitz of the dal, the gag of the ches, that's not considered to be chok tochos, that's chok yirechos, and that's why it's kosev in Shabbos, and it's perfectly consistent with the din that you have in Maseches Gittin as well. The Ran says no. The Ran says there's a very fundamental difference between Shabbos and Kol HaTorah Kula, because when it comes to Kol HaTorah Kula, you have to do a formal pu'ulas haksiva. You must actually go ahead and write a letter. If you don't write a letter proper, you operate in a background. That's not writing a letter. You have to write the letter itself by just forming a letter through happenstance, by working on the background, and memela, the letter is created. So that's what we see in Kol HaTorah Kula. That's not called kosev. You need to operate in the letter itself. However, when it comes to Shabbos, we have a new principle, Meleches Machsheves Asra Torah. Even if you don't engage in a process of writing the letter itself, but you create a letter and you had kavanah to create the letter. I don't care how you created the letter. Meleches Machsheves indicates we focus on result, not process. It's a result-oriented activity, and therefore, since you produced a result of a letter of kosev, you will be chayv in Shabbos. In other words, says the Ran, there is a core difference between Kol HaTorah Kula, where you need an affirmative act of writing. When it comes to Shabbos, we have the principle of Machsheves Asra Torah. It's sufficient just to have a result, the generation of a letter, even though you didn't create it through a formal act of ksiva itself. The Avnei Nezer just suggests a possible other approach, which again has big ramifications. I just wanted to mention it to resolve perhaps this apparent contradiction between Gittin on the one hand and Shabbos on the other. And that is based on something we saw in earlier shiur, introductory shiurim, and that is the question of, are there toldos in Kol HaTorah Kula? We know when it comes to Shabbos, we have the concept of avos, those we've done in the Mishkan, we have toldos, extensions that we learn out. V'asa me'achas mehena. Mehena teaches, hena is avos. Mehena, says the Gemara Masechet Shabbos Daf Samach, mehena of avos are toldos. Shabbos we have the chiddush that Shabbos you have avos and you have toldos. Are there toldos in